Hello ladies and gentlemen, welcome to my wonderful 101 crash course. I'll explain why this video is called How to Enjoy the Wonderful 101 rather than How to Play the Wonderful 101 in a moment, but first I have some advice even if you're thinking about going into it blind. There's a few beginner traps which could diminish your enjoyment, so knowing a few small things beforehand is a good idea. First of all, it's absolutely crucial that you buy Unite Guts and Unite Spring from the Wonderful Mart as soon as you finish the prologue. In other words, once you finish the school bus stage at the start, this menu appears where you can visit a shop. Don't forget to go in there to buy Guts and Spring. Unite Guts is your block and Unite Spring is your dodge. Your experience with other action games might lead you to believe that dodging is more important than blocking, but don't let preconceived notions dictate how you play. The Wonderful 101 is different from other action games in many regards, and your experience will improve if you approach it on its own terms, experiment and pay attention. Blocking is extremely valuable in this game, so default to using Guts instead of Spring. Keep in mind though that Guts is a pudding, so sharp attacks will puncture it, whereas blunt attacks will be repelled. Secondly, you can zoom the camera in or out. Holding L1 zooms out and holding R1 zooms in. I recommend zooming out at the start of every mission. During combat it will sometimes zoom in by itself, but there's nothing you can do about that, so don't worry or try to zoom it out again or anything, it's not going to work. Sometimes it just decides to zoom in. For example, if there's only one enemy left, it will usually zoom in enough just to frame the two of you, and that's normal. In the beginning it might seem bad to have the camera zoomed so far out, since most action games keep you very close to your player character. Keep in mind there's a leader highlight circle around your main wonderful one, and that's the only one that can take real damage. If the others get hit, they'll just be incapacitated, which isn't ideal, but not a big deal either. If you're dashing, your leader will be swallowed up and protected by the group, so you can't see the circle anymore, but you're always going to be in the center of that group, so you always know where your leader is regardless. I want to stress it's normal for the distant perspective to be a little disorientating at first. There's a lot going on in this game, but if you stick with it, you'll be able to track your leader without even trying. It becomes second nature after a certain point. You'll just have to trust me on that one. Thirdly, at some point you'll come up against spiked enemies which need to be whipped to peel off their spikes. If you use a bigger whip, you'll peel off more spikes at once. Use a small whip and it'll take ages, but with a big whip you can get it done in just a few strikes. Fourthly, you can hold the L1 button to speed up the Wonderliner, allowing you to draw shapes more quickly. Up to you whether you want to use it or not, but if the line feels too slow, just be aware that's an option. Lastly, you'll collect space vegetables as you go through the stages, which can be used to create items. To do so, go into the menu and look for the Mixer tab. I'll level with you, most of the items are bad, they're just healing things you never need to use, but if you mix together 30 of each vegetable you'll get a credit card, which can be used to buy any item from the shop, no matter how expensive it is. Naturally, this will speed up the rate at which you acquire new skills. Just save up 30 of each vegetable and mix them together. Now, the reason this video is called How to Enjoy the Wonderful 101 rather than How to Play the Wonderful 101 is because I want to give you some general advice about your mentality first. At this point, I've given you the most valuable tips for a first playthrough, and I recommend that you just go ahead and play the game now. Your first pass through is going to be messy, some things will confuse you, some things will challenge you, but that can be fun in its own way. It's not every day a game as different as the Wonderful 101 releases, so you're really not going to get many opportunities to go through an experience like this again. Not only that, but the fact of the matter is, even other action games, which are more normal, let's say, even other action games like that, they can't teach you everything about them in the beginning. For example, Bayonetta has a massive combo list of different attack strings you can branch into, but it doesn't make you sit down and learn them all before you can play, because that would be boring. They're useful to know, but you can learn them just by playing the game, you know what I mean? The same is true here. The best way to go about it is just to enjoy that learning process for what it is. If you've seen my Beautiful Joe commentary, this is what I was getting at when I compared action games to puzzle games. There's always more to learn by figuring out how you can combine your abilities. If you pay attention to the visual cues and experiment with all your skills, you can do it. If you get frustrated or disheartened, you can ask yourself the question, is there a better way to do this? Because there usually is. Not always, but more often than you might think. Even this long video won't be able to cover everything, and I guarantee there are things I don't even know about the game yet, so experimentation is absolutely key. You'll get bad ranks on your first playthrough, that's fine, it's normal. The ranks are balanced for when you know what to do, otherwise you just get perfect ranks every time you replayed it. It has to be a little harsh so it remains challenging. The ranks are like a yardstick you can use to measure yourself against, so yeah, it can be tough to see a bronze or a consolation prize, but that's how you know you've gotten better later. Don't let it get you down, just take it as an indication that you could be doing something better somehow. So my advice is to go play the game and have fun. It has a reputation for being difficult to get into, but I went in without any guides, and even though I did suffer at some points, it was always satisfying to work out a new trick which made something much more manageable. Please don't deprive yourself of that by watching this entire video at once. Even if you were to watch the whole thing straight through, you wouldn't remember it all anyway. It would just kind of spoil things for you without much benefit, you know? How I want you to use this video is as an ongoing back and forth guide, like someone playing alongside with you and sharing information from time to time. If you feel like you've learned an important new piece of information, stop the video and go play. You can always come back later if you feel stuck. There'll be timestamps in the description for various topics if you're looking for something in particular, but apart from that, I've tried to structure this video so the most important, less spoilery stuff comes first and vice versa. There's also a long section at the end where I'll cover some of the genre shifts and set pieces that differ from core combat. If one of them is giving you trouble, you can use the timestamps to skip to them and just learn about that particular one. Alright, I think you get my point. I'll just say one last time that games like The Wonderful 101 don't release very often. If you spoil the discovery process on yourself, you'll be missing out on something you won't easily find again. Go play, have as much fun as you can, and come back if you feel you need some help. I'll see you later. Alright, I'll assume you've played at least some of the game now, ideally up to at least Operation 5. Now it's time to talk about the Wonderliner and weapons. First of all, it's important to note that enemies can interfere with the line, but terrain rarely, if ever, can. Even if you're next to a building, drawing a straight line for the sword is done just by holding the right analog stick in a single direction. Same goes for every other weapon. The actual shape on the terrain is really just a visualization of the input you've made on the analog stick. So instead of thinking, I'm going to draw a line, I find it more beneficial to just get a feel for each weapon on the stick. In other words, the sword is just holding the stick a single direction, and the hand is just doing a smooth outer motion around the edge. Don't just look at it, feel it as well. As for the morphs themselves, I have some advice on how they can be drawn. Everything I'm about to say is how I feel most comfortable drawing morphs, so if you find a way which is comfortable for you and works, that's fine. If it works consistently and feels good, just keep it up. First of all, the gun doesn't need to be a sharp angle. It can be a single smooth turn, which is much faster and easier to draw. Keep in mind you can draw a small handle and just make the barrel really long if you want a larger size. This goes for other morphs too. You can draw a really long handle for the hammer with just a tiny circle at the end if you find that easier. The whip is simple enough, don't think it needs much explanation. Soft curves on the stick, gentle, almost like drawing a sword but with a slight wobble to it, that's all. The hammer is much trickier. I think two things define the hammer as far as the game is concerned. First of all, a sharp turn away from the line, and secondly, the top has to circle back around onto itself. So the turn can't be too soft, go for about a 90-degree angle away, and the circle at the top has to at least point back on itself to be considered a hammer. Since enemies which block the Wonderliner tend to also have armor, it can be useful to learn how to draw the hammer in a different direction. Naturally, this can be difficult, but with some practice I assure you everything can be done consistently. Which reminds me, if you're having trouble with the Wonderliner, it might be tempting to blame the game by assuming it's inconsistent somehow, but this is demonstrably false because if you input the exact same motion on the stick, you'll get the exact same shape. Now I'm not saying it's flawless or anything, but if you're constantly having one shape confused for another, try adjusting how you're drawing it. You'll eventually find a way where you can get it every time. The game doesn't have a practice room, but there's nothing stopping you from just loading up the first stage and messing around for a while. Go at a pace that suits you. Anyway, claws are defined by a sharp, acute angle between lines, not curvy at all, just straight lines moving in different directions. For this one, it helps to really slam the stick back and forth. It's the opposite of the whip in that sense. Whip is soft movements, claws harsh movements. You can also push the claws almost back on themselves. They can be really quite compact, which probably helps avoid turning them into a whip by mistake. Again, keep in mind, you can make bigger claws just by holding that final line for longer. You don't have to make the whole shape bigger. I've been drawing them left to right or right to left, but they can also be done in other directions. Just do whatever you're comfortable with. The important thing to remember is to slam the stick back and forth harshly rather than being soft with it, otherwise you'll get a whip. Lastly, there's the bomb. Now, this is where I have another piece of advice. If you're playing the remastered version, which I'll assume you are from this point forward, you need to buy the multi-unite ability from the shop rather than just having it innately. This ability allows you to use different weapons at the same time. The sub-weapon, I'll call it the sub-weapon, but it's kind of like a teammate or something. I'm just going to call it the sub-weapon for the sake of simplicity. The sub-weapon will perform an auto combo, but since it's a bomb, it just explodes. It's basically the same effect as if you had thrown it yourself. In other words, it's almost never actually worth equipping the bomb because you can only have one bomb out at a time anyway, which means you'll just have to swap weapon again after you use it. Instead of doing that, draw a bomb and use it as a sub-weapon by pressing the team attack button, triangle by default. This will generate a bomb and drop it without changing your main weapon, so you can capitalize on that bomb more easily. As for drawing the bomb itself, I think this one is quite easy. Personally, I draw mine kind of flowy, by which I mean my hammers are very rigid, but the bomb kind of smoothly flows around back on itself. This makes it easier, I think, to close off the circle, and once it is closed off, the line afterwards signals to the game that I want a bomb, so the line afterwards doesn't have to be perfectly straight. Again, you'll just have to experiment and see what works for you, but it's worth trying to find a very fast and simple way to draw this one, since you'll want to do it a lot if you're going to get deep into the combat. Keep in mind that creating morphs requires some energy. You can see your unite gauge, that's the batteries in the top left corner. Generally speaking, each morph consumes one battery, with larger weapons consuming more. Guts and Spring also consume one battery each, so if you have no battery you won't be able to use them. That said, if you successfully reflect an attack with Guts or dodge an attack at the last moment with Spring, the energy will be refunded, so successfully using these techniques isn't punished. The Speed Charge custom block will double the rate at which the Unite gauge replenishes, which makes it a very strong upgrade worth buying early. Each stage has batteries scattered around as collectibles. Collecting 20 batteries will increase your maximum gauge for the remainder of that stage. Remember that the gauge resets at the start of every level though, so you should be more conservative with your battery in the beginning. Collect batteries and you'll have an easier time with later encounters. As for the weapons themselves, if you're not sure how to use them, here's a quick overview. Hand is great at dealing high damage for single targets, which perhaps not coincidentally makes it the ideal choice for bosses a lot of the time. In the beginning, you might be tempted to use the sword all the time since it's the easiest to draw, but don't neglect the hand. When an enemy has a larger amount of health, using the hand instead of the sword will speed the encounter up significantly. If fights feel tedious or whatever, and you're relying on the sword, that's probably why. The sword's damage really isn't that great. When you want to kill something quickly, make a big hand. Keep in mind, hand is also immune to fire. That includes fire attacks, which will actually add a fire buff to your hand if you're hit by one. Sword is great for crowd control. When you enter an encounter with a ton of little dogus or UFOs, a large sword cyclone can clear them out very quickly. Sword also has the longest aerial combo, which makes it good for getting points during a juggle. For defense, sword can reflect lasers and is also immune to electrical attacks. Gun is a utility weapon. It can pick up bombs and shoot them back at opponents. For the most part, gun isn't used to deal damage. However, it builds up a huge amount of score multiplier with each hit, and each bullet causes a wonderful one to latch onto the target, the purpose of which will be explained later. Whip is mainly used for peeling off spikes. However, it can also pick up some bombs like the gun, and it has the longest range, which can be useful in a few instances. When an Oregon snake enemy sticks its tail out of the ground, the whip can be used to pull it out. Hammer deals large damage with some area of effect splash, however it's very slow. It's necessary to hit through turtle shells, and it can also be used to break other enemies' shields more quickly. Claws are used for cracking open shells and climbing walls. If I remember right, they score more points than a sword under normal circumstances, but the usefulness of this is questionable. If you hit an enemy enough times with claws, they'll be frozen, which will make them vulnerable for a short time. This is probably the last weapon you should attempt to integrate into your play, except for those situations where you need to crack something open. It's kind of an all-rounder like hand or sword, but with the disadvantage that it's more difficult to draw. The bomb is another utility weapon. As I mentioned earlier, it's usually better to use this one as a multi-unite rather than the main weapon. Enemies caught by a bomb will slow down and be more vulnerable, however they're not stunned and their animations will resume where they left off when the bomb ends. Now, before I talk about stuns, juggles and all that fancy stuff, I have a few more general pieces of advice which might smooth out some problems for you. Again, if any of these come as a revelation, I encourage you to go back and play some more. Firstly, the camera. I love the camera of this game, and I think the more you play, the more you'll come to terms with it, but it's not perfect. Sometimes enemies will disappear off screen, which is why it's important to remember audio cues. The tank in particular has a very strong audio cue for its attacks, which will help you avoid them even if you can't see them. If you have difficulty hearing it, then mess around with your audio settings until you can, and remember wearing a pair of headphones can also help. Not only that, but keep in mind you can actually manipulate the camera, or at least play around it to some degree, just by choosing where you move. For example, in this encounter you have the choice of prioritizing the left or right tank. If you choose the right one, the left one could easily disappear off screen, but that's not true the other way around. If you choose the left one, the right one is much more likely to stay on screen. In other words, if you want everything to remain visible, it's better to prioritize enemies in the foreground, since background ones will still be on camera that way. Play smarter, not harder. When you're still learning, it's common to have your team disrupted by the enemy, either when you take damage or mess up by attacking something while it was blocking. Keep in mind, you don't have to have a full team at all times. If some of your members get knocked away, but you still have about 30 people available, it's not necessary to collect all the other team members right away. Even if you don't touch them, they'll rejoin the team after a short delay automatically. They're just stunned for a little while. It's a choice, not something you have to do every single time. That said, if you choose to gather them back up, you can use the Wonderliner and team attack to your advantage to speed this process up. You can even run around with the Wonderliner extended. If you make the mistake of swinging at an enemy while they're deflecting, your weapon will shatter, causing all the wonderful ones in that weapon to be scattered. Keep in mind, you can avoid having your whole team caught in this by just not using your biggest morph all the time, or alternatively you can react to the shatter when it occurs. There's a short window of time when this happens where pressing the dash or spring button will save those members from being scattered. Just pay attention and you'll get the timing for this down in no time. Remember, wonderful ones are a team, and sometimes they have to take a hit for the team. It's okay to leave them lying on the ground if you need to prioritize something else instead. If you want to build up a large team as quickly as possible, then you should know it's possible to recruit Dogus and chew Dogus. Those are the smallest enemies in the game. When they're about to die, they'll sometimes go into a kind of exploding animation where they turn purple. Rescue them at this point by drawing a line around them and they'll join your team. There might be some ways to make them consistently go into that exploding animation, but for now I'll let you experiment. Just remember, it's a possibility. Alright, let's talk about special attacks. Each weapon can unlock a Wonderful Stinger, Wonderful Rising and Wonderful Cyclone attack. Your wonderful ones each have a rank, and their rank contributes to the overall rank for that weapon. Basically, the more they level up, the more of these moves unlock. You can make this happen a little faster by changing which wonderful ones you assign as a leader, but honestly, fiddling around with menus is boring and I don't think you should worry about it. You can also rank up just by recruiting more wonderful ones, so look for secrets and keep your eyes peeled for them as you play. Anyway, Wonderful Stinger is a gap closer which scores 50 bonus points if it hits an enemy. To perform it, you do a back-forward motion on the left stick, so slam the left analog stick left and right in quick succession, then press the attack button immediately afterwards. If you do it correctly, you'll lunge forward. The timing on this is tight and might take some getting used to, so be quick. Keep in mind, this can also be performed in any direction just by inputting different directions on the left analog stick. In other words, if you want to stinger up, you slam down then up. To do it left, you slam right then left, and so on. It's worth noting that the gun stinger attack is special. Instead of lunging forward, it will engage a rapid fire mode which will allow you to shoot much more quickly. This is great for building up multiplier, and it will also result in a lot of your team members climbing on the enemy, the purpose of which will be explained soon. By the way, even if you draw a large gun by mistake and end up with the rocket launcher, you can still do the stinger input. The morph will automatically change back to the handgun, so don't worry. Under certain circumstances, wonderful rising attacks are capable of launching an enemy. To perform a rising attack, you just press the jump button and then the attack button immediately afterwards. Not at the exact same time, just in quick succession. Since you can double jump, you can also perform 2 rising attacks before touching the ground. Again, gun rising is different. This will flip the gun and do a rapid fire attack upwards, which is capable of launching and juggling an enemy. The bomb rising attack is also unique. It will toss the bomb into the air. This is difficult to accomplish, however, and requires you equip the bomb rather than using it as a multi-unite, so consider this an advanced technique, not something you should try right away. Wonderful cyclone attacks are performed by spinning the left analog stick in a full 360-degree motion, then pressing the attack button. If you have trouble with this, you can continue spinning the stick as you press the button. In other words, it doesn't have to be a perfect 360-degree turn. You could do 480 degrees or 720 or whatever. The important thing is just that you be spinning the stick. So you can spin the stick over and over and just press the button whenever you're ready to do the attack. This will cause most weapons to twirl around and also scores bonus points. Since cyclone attacks last a little bit longer than regular attacks, they're good for buying time if you want to change weapons while juggling something. In other words, you can use a sword to juggle, then when you're in the air, do a sword cyclone, and while the sword is spinning, you can use that time to draw and equip your next weapon. A big sword cyclone is one of the best crowd control techniques. You can clear out tiny dogus or UFOs nearly instantly this way. Once again, gun and bomb behave differently, but you can just experiment with those. They're not as important as the other ones I've mentioned. It's worth noting that the claw cyclone is also slightly different, since it can be extended by continuing to tap the attack button, keeping it active for longer. Now that you know all the special attacks, it's time to explain something more advanced. This might be a little bit difficult to follow, so feel free to watch this bit again or just pay attention here, okay? It's possible to buffer one of these special attacks before you equip a weapon, which will then happen immediately as you summon a new morph. Here's what I mean. Say we have the hammer equipped, but we want to do a sword stinger attack. At the same time that I'm drawing the sword with the right stick, I can also do the back forth motion on the left stick. Then, when I press the attack button, the sword will be summoned immediately into the stinger motion. In other words, it cuts out the middleman. I don't have to make the sword stand around with it and then use stinger. I can input the stinger motion and the sword symbol at the same time, summoning a stinger sword immediately. This applies to all weapons and all attacks. Of course, this is difficult to do. Naturally, it takes some getting used to, but it can smooth out your play by allowing you to string together moves more quickly. If you want to try this out, what I recommend is sword is the simplest morph, of course. So you don't have to do both things at the exact same time, okay? You can draw the morph and just have it ready, drawn on the ground, and then do the left-right motion and press the attack button, and you'll see what I mean. Okay, so you don't have to be using both analog sticks at the exact same time. You can draw the morph, then do the back forth, and then press attack, okay? But naturally, the whole point is that you can sort of smooth it out by doing multiple things at once and go straight into the stinger attack. But if you want to practice it, just draw the morph first and then try it, okay? Takes some getting used to, but if you want to try it out and do something simple but stylish and get some practice in, a good technique, a good learning exercise is to swap between hand and sword cyclones in the air. That is very much like patting your head and rubbing your stomach at the same time. That's the moment where your hands will get confused, at least when you first do it. But you'll have to see for yourself. Give it a shot anyway, and yeah, you can take it from there. I suppose I need to tell you how to juggle. Enemies can't just be juggled out of nowhere. They need to be made vulnerable first, which can be accomplished in two ways. The first is Unite Guts. If you reflect an enemy's attack, they'll be put into a dizzy state signified by stars swirling over their head. If you attack them while dizzy, every attack will score 100 bonus points, but the dizzy status also means they can be launched. By using a wonderful rising attack, you can take them into the air, which continues to award bonus points for every attack, so naturally keeping them in the air is a very good scoring method. The simplest way of doing this is to use Guts and then go into a sword rising attack. I won't go over them all, but for example, the hand does 4 hits, the last of which sends the enemy flying away horizontally. The sword, on the other hand, has a 5-hit combo, the last of which slams the enemy back to the ground, so it's an overhead attack that goes back down to the ground, which might not be what you want because then you can't juggle them anymore. So instead of letting that last hit play out, you can instead just do the first 4 attacks and then do another wonderful rising to launch the enemy even higher up. After that, the combo starts over from the beginning, so we can get another 4 hits in again before we have to worry about slamming them into the ground. It doesn't need to end there though. You could swap to a different weapon, you could do a sword cyclone instead, or you could use Unite Tombstone to drop below the enemy. Remember, anytime you can jump, you can do a rising attack, so if you touch the ground, rising is available again. This allows you to keep the enemy in the air even longer. How you go from there is up to you. You might decide to switch to the hand to finish them off now that you've milked a few points from them, or you could be a show off and do something a little more fancy. The possibilities at this point are nearly endless, and the better you get at using the Wonder Liner, the more you can toy around with them. That's how you juggle when you actually are juggling, okay? But there's a second way to make the enemy vulnerable in the first place, the team attack. This is the little swarm that happens if you press the triangle button. Your teammates will move towards the opponent and latch onto them. Do this enough times, and the enemy will be so overwhelmed they'll be vulnerable for a juggle. There's a clear audio-visual cue that happens when the threshold is reached. Buying the formation charge upgrade will allow you to hold the team attack button for a stronger team attack, but there's also another way. Remember, the gun uses Wonderful Ones as ammo, and the gun stinger attack fires very quickly. This allows you to stun enemies much faster, which means that Gunstinger is one of the most useful abilities in the game. You can even press the team attack button while you're doing Gunstinger to stun them even faster. Both of those attacks have a second function as well. When one of your Wonderful Ones latches onto an opponent, a yellow ring appears underneath them. This engages a type of lock-on. Basically, if you have lock-on active, your attacks will zip directly towards that target. In other words, if you're on the other side of the screen and you press the A button, you'll zip all the way over to the enemy automatically before doing the attack. This applies to special attacks too. In other words, you can do a wonderful rising from the other side of the screen just by having lock-on active and pressing the rising inputs. So just the jump and attack buttons in quick succession. No input on the left analog stick needed. Your character will close the distance and launch. Note that this also applies to multi-unites as well. Hopefully all this knowledge will now improve your scores. You can take the enemy into the air and you'll be able to score a lot more points. Just keep in mind, you don't need to use the biggest morph all the time, or the smallest one for that matter. You know, the middling ones are actually kind of the best ones. But a big morph will kill the enemy very quickly, depriving you of points. Also, don't forget to build up your multiplier too, because both parts of your score are equally important. There's probably a lot more to say about juggles, but I'll leave it there. You can experiment and come up with your own combos. If you want to practice juggles, the start of 001B is a good place since there's a large dogu that spawns there. Learning to juggle is a point where drawing with the Wonderliner can feel especially complicated, but like anything, it gets better with some practice. Just go for it. Alright, time for some more general advice. This time I'll talk about some enemy-specific strategies, but before getting into specifics, I want to point out that enemies will behave rationally. In other words, if there's an enemy on the other side of the screen, it's not going to throw a punch that will obviously miss you. It'll charge at you or fire on you or something like that. In other words, they're predictable and even manipulatable to some extent. Now, one way this game differs from other action games is that it's very easy to get tunnel vision on whichever enemy you're attacking. You need to broaden your awareness to the whole arena and track multiple enemies at once to stay safe. This is challenging, but also gives the game a nice flavour compared to some others. Anyway, just keep that in mind. Avoid getting tunnel vision wherever possible. Obviously, the turtles are one of the most awkward ones to deal with at first. However, there is a useful trick you can use against them. You can manipulate them into trying to stomp you by standing near their feet. The stomp can be reflected by guts, which will open up their underside for some damage. If you do enough damage, you'll tip them over, leaving them vulnerable for even longer. It's also worth noting that when you get halfway through a turtle's health bar, the shell on their back will crack, which means they're no longer reflecting attacks. At that point, you don't have to use the hammer, you can hit them with anything. Be careful though, because if you make a huge morph, you might hit the other turtle by mistake and shatter yourself. When a turtle is unbalanced, attacking it with a hammer will actually slam it back onto the ground since the basic hammer attack hits downwards. You can avoid this by using a different morph or using a special hammer attack like Wonderful Rising instead. Don't forget, you can use multi-unite too. In other words, you can keep the hammer equipped and use your teammates to topple them over while you avoid attacks from the other turtle. Another good strategy is to use hero counter with the hammer, but I'll explain that ability in full later. The dragons will put up a giant shield sometimes, but this too is predictable. If you go on the offense against them without stunning them, they'll retaliate by raising the shield. Stun them first to avoid this behaviour. Like many enemies, dragons can be launched, but it takes a large morph since they're heavy. It will take several guts reflections for a dragon to be stunned, but there's a brief window of time after any reflection where a launch is possible. Do it quickly enough and you can launch them right away. If you can't kill them before they raise their shield, there's an alternate way of opening them. Circle around behind them and bait them into a tail slam. If you guts the slam, the shield will be forced open. Unfortunately, the giant slam from the crab can't be reflected by guts. In fact, guts seems pretty much useless against these guys in general, but there are some other options. You can reflect their mouth laser with the sword. You just have to be careful to stand away from their mouth since it also generates a damaging vortex. If you catch it before it fires the laser, it's actually possible to send the Wonderliner into its open mouth, attacking it from within. When it stands up, cutting off its legs will force a stun, after which you can crack open its back and deal big damage. Using the claws to open them up might cause your combo to drop since it takes so long, so it's a good idea to send out a multi-unite before you go into that animation. That way your combo will be maintained. Multi-unite is also useful against raydowns since it allows you to keep the sword equipped while breaking their shield much more quickly with the hammer. When the whip latches onto an enemy with spikes, there's a brief moment where you're stuck in place during which you're vulnerable. This can be unfortunate in some of the more punishing encounters. But if you press the dash button right after the whip latches on, the spikes will still be removed and you'll regain control of your leader much more quickly. Basically, you can cancel this recovery animation with the dash button. In fact, most animations can be cancelled with the dash. The downside being that it will also cancel any multi-unites you have active, and if you hold the button, your leader will whistle, which recalls any wonderful ones which are currently latched onto opponents. While we're on the subject, it's not necessary to hold the dash button to keep dashing. You can let go of it and you'll dash as long as you keep moving around. When you come up against Duras, the fast enemies that need to be slowed by a bomb, don't just rely on the bomb to disable them. Use the bomb as an opening for a proper stun by using Gunstinger and team attacks. That way you can launch and juggle like usual. Duras actually have a kick which can be gutsed if you're fast enough, although it's very risky, but it is technically an alternate way of stunning them if you're on the ball. Finally, Tumiki enemies, the blocky ones that copy your attacks, are vulnerable to whichever morph they perform. In other words, if one makes a hand and you hit it with a hand of your own, it'll take huge damage and shatter, making these fights go much more quickly. I think that covers most of the enemy specific strategies. There's probably a bit more to say about some of the other ones, but that's probably most of the awkward bits sort of smoothed out for you there. So let's move on to Geathjerk Weapons. You might have noticed that enemies have a coloured circle which appears when they warp in. This actually tells you something. If an enemy warps in with a red circle and you get the killing blow with a hand, they'll drop their Geathjerk weapon. Blue means sword, green means gun, and so on. Basically, it's not random. You can make them drop just about every enemy weapon if you kill them with the right morph. This has a couple of uses. First of all, Geathjerk weapons are often highly damaging, and secondly, they also score a lot of points. Every attack from a Geathjerk weapon has a 100 point bonus. Just remember, your multiplier needs some attention too. Anyway, you can use a Geathjerk weapon by pressing the dash button, which naturally leaves you unable to dash. These weapons are heavy and will slow you down, but there's two solutions. To drop the weapon, wiggle the left analog stick back and forth. Otherwise, if you'd like to keep it, you can use Unite Ball to move at a regular speed. You can even carry weapons from one encounter to another this way. If a certain fight is giving you a lot of trouble, you can try grabbing a Geathjerk weapon beforehand. It's rarely a bad choice to use one. As for the weapons themselves, I won't go through them all, but for example, if you use the big sword, it has a pretty bad recovery animation. You can cancel this animation using Spring, allowing you to attack a little quicker. The others you'll have to figure out for yourself, but as far as I'm aware, they all just have one attack, so they're pretty simple. The problem is just knowing where and when to use them. Next, I'll talk about upgrades and custom blocks. This is a matter of opinion and taste and all that, but if you want a quick overview of which upgrades I recommend buying first, here it is in order. Remember, you don't have to buy them in this order. Don't just blindly follow what I'm saying here. You can buy them in whatever order you find appealing, okay? This is just my recommendation. I recommend Multi-Unite 1, Speedliner, Speed Charge, Dodge Mine, Hero Time, and Unite Charge. You don't have to adhere strictly to this, okay? It's your call. Beyond that, just pick whatever ones you want, but I'll go through this list individually and I'll pass my own judgment on them to some extent. Again, I could be wrong about some of these. Maybe I haven't learned how some of them are useful. Maybe I overrate some of them. There's always more to learn, okay? But I have played the game a good bit, so yeah, you can probably trust me to some degree on these, okay? Alright. Attack Liner. This causes your wonderful ones to damage an enemy if they pass through them while you're drawing a line. If the attack liner moves into an armoured enemy, it counts as an attack and thus will stun the wonderful one in the line, so be careful. Using attack liner will regenerate some battery. Well, I've written this down, but I didn't fact check it, so I assume it does. I think having your team just sort of generally attack something, like if you walk over to an enemy and do nothing, but your team members start doing their little attacks, I think that regenerates battery faster. And I also think using attack liner regenerates battery, but I didn't fact check it before doing this, so you can go fact check it for me by playing the game. Alright, there are ways to get your battery back quicker, that's my point anyway. I think attack liner is one of them, but anyway, if you're stuck with no other way of dealing damage, attack liner can also be a way of maintaining your combo so it doesn't drop, so it'll do kind of chip damage against an enemy which will keep your combo active. Multi-Unite. This allows you to perform an auto combo with a sub-weapon without having to equip it, essentially allowing you to have two morphs active at the same time. To do so, draw the weapon as usual, but press the team attack button rather than the regular attack button. Further upgrades to this skill will allow you to summon even more morphs at the same time, up to a maximum of 5. This is an amazing skill and the recommended way of using Unite Bomb. While I highly recommend buying Multi-Unite early, its value does significantly diminish after that first purchase. Going from 1 to 2 morphs is huge, but going from 2 to 3 is not nearly as useful. Obviously, you should buy them all at some point, but I would buy at least a few other upgrades before buying another level of this one. Speedliner, pretty self-explanatory. This speeds up the Wonderliner, allowing you to draw shapes more quickly. I recommend buying this one early because if you keep playing, you'll spend most of your time with Speedliner enabled, so it's better to get it as soon as possible and build up your muscle memory with that increased speed. Even if you buy Speedliner, you can still hold the L1 button to speed your line up even more, allowing you to draw max size morph extremely quickly if you do it right. Formation Charge. This allows you to hold the team attack button to charge up a more powerful team attack, which causes several wonderful ones to latch onto the target, building up more stun naturally. I don't recommend this one because Gunstinger is already so good, and you can spam the team attack button anyway. Formation Charge is probably faster, but not by that much. Maybe it's best if you were to hold the button before you went into an encounter. I'm rarely thinking that far ahead, but maybe if I was on a pure platinum run, it would be something that would be on my mind in early stages. I don't know. Yeah. Not that great. Not that great. Blade Glider. It's possible to draw a glider whenever you want, not just during those specific glider sections. Blade Glider causes the glider to damage enemies. If you want to go for a stylish juggle, you can use this, but it's not a high priority upgrade at all. It's not a detriment or anything, but it's not very useful. Just gives the glider a little bit more utility. Unite Spikes. Causes guts to do damage to nearby enemies. Self-explanatory, worth buying, but not high priority since the guts reflection will often do damage anyway. Unite Drill Spring. Warning. 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 Okay, pay attention to this one. While this one is kind of cool, it can severely backfire against armoured enemies. Doing a drill spring into a shield will shatter your team. Be careful and remember you can turn off upgrades in the menu. This is the most common upgrade to turn off after buying it. In fact, you might never turn it on again after trying it, so it's a very low priority purchase. Unite Ball allows you to carry Geathjerk Weapons faster and is also necessary for getting some collectibles. A middling upgrade if you ask me. Unite Spike Ball causes the ball to do damage. If you do a spike ball under a juggled opponent, you can keep them off the ground, so it's kind of handy and pretty fun. Unite Camp. This adds another function to the dash button. By keeping the dash button held and staying still, the team will form a tent which instantly refills the entire Unite gauge. Staying in the tent even longer will actually overcharge the gauge, turning it a nice platinum shade, and at that point any morph you make will automatically be the largest size. These large morphs persist as long as the gauge remains overcharged, allowing you to carry a max size morph around for much longer. While this sounds useful, the unfortunate reality is that Unite Camp requires you to stay still for quite a while, calling its usefulness into question. That said, it costs nothing to perform, so it's a straight upgrade in every sense of the word. Maybe if you have more patience than me, you would find this one extremely useful, but either way I would say it's not bad by any means. Unite Tombstone. Deals damage to an airborne enemy and gets you back to the ground, allowing you to launch them again with another rising attack. Also, ending an encounter by slamming a giant tombstone on your enemy it just never gets old. Keep in mind this one costs 3 whole batteries of the Unite gauge, so if it doesn't come out, you probably didn't have enough power for it. A very useful skill once you start juggling things. Unite Rocket. By mashing the jump button, the team will turn into a rocket. This is required for at least one collectible and is mostly useful for exploring. Deals damage to an enemy if done underneath them. I'm just thinking about the rocket. I said it's required for a collectible, but you can actually pick up collectibles by forming a morph that touches them. So if you form a big sword, you might be able to grab the collectible I'm thinking of. Something worth testing. You know, if you made a really huge sword, your sword would reach up. Basically, there's a point where you gotta go up to grab something. And maybe if you made a really big sword, you'd be able to get it without using the rocket. So maybe it's not required at all. Anyway, deals damage to an enemy if done from underneath them. Difficult to pull off, but fun nonetheless. Speed Charge. Doubles the rate at which your batteries refill. Extremely useful as a result. Highly recommended. Unite Charge. This one allows you to make a large morph just by holding the attack button. There's 2 things to keep in mind about it. First of all, I think anyway, holding the button uses more battery than just drawing a big morph by yourself, I think. Not much, but it's a little inefficient, and it's also a little slower than if you were to do the shape as quickly as possible yourself. Secondly, you don't have to go for the maximum size morph right away. It's possible to make a small morph, use a few attacks, then hold the attack button to grow into a medium morph, use a few attacks, then grow again. You get the idea. This way, your battery actually recharges while you're building your morph up. Basically, you can stagger it out rather than growing all at once, which might be a good strategy for dealing damage and conserving battery. Anyway, either way, it's a good upgrade overall. Dodge Mine. This adds an attack to the back side of the spring by leaving a mine behind. It doesn't do much damage, but it doesn't cost any extra meter either. Unlike Drill Spring, I'm not aware of any ways this can backfire, so there's no real reason to not use it. It has a major use, which I'll detail a little later, but I won't spoil that just yet. I'll just say it relates to Operation 007A. Hero Time. This adds hero time to your dodge. In other words, springing away from a source of damage right before it hits you slows down time for everything but you, opening up another opportunity to punish attacks. This finally puts Spring on par with Guts, making Spring worth using as an alternative sometimes. If you want to get more mileage out of this ability, then you should also know it's possible to trigger it anywhere you see spikes. So if an enemy drops a spike bomb on the ground, dropping into that bomb will trigger hero time at will. Outside of those moments where you can sometimes get a freebie activation like that, hero time is a high risk, high reward, but overall great upgrade. Ukemi. This allows you to cancel damage, healing yourself by saving your rank. When you get hit by an attack, your leader will usually go flying through the air. When this happens, you can press the jump button right before they touch the ground to activate Ukemi. It has a really obvious animation where the camera focuses in on the leader for a second and your health bar refills, so if you get it right, you'll know. This can't be used on attacks which flatten you, since you don't go flying through the air, and it also doesn't work on secret missions since your health bar is segmented in those. It's basically a crutch, a good crutch, but still a crutch. You should avoid using it where possible. Or you should do a commentary video and only use it once and ruin your no damage thing. Anyway. Hero Counter. This is a parry of sorts. When an enemy is about to hit you, push the left analog stick in the direction of the incoming attack, by which I mean you should slam the stick from neutral to the outer edge and hold it there, as if you're suddenly bracing yourself against the attack. If you've timed it right, a visual effect will trigger and the attack will do no damage. Not only that, but you'll summon the largest possible morph your team can make at that moment and strike back with, I think, what is a faster attack that costs no Unite gauge. This is particularly useful against turtles since it speeds up the hammer's otherwise lengthy animations, at least I think. I didn't fact check it, but it certainly feels faster to me. And basically, it's a very useful skill, but it's something for experts, and even then it remains a risky option since the timing window is so tight. If you get it wrong, you'll eat a lot of damage. Aspire to use it one day, but if you're still adapting to the combat, don't worry about it just yet. Guts and Spring are perfectly fine for the most part. I won't talk about other custom blocks because I honestly haven't used most of them. Generally, I recommend avoiding anything which acts as a crutch. In other words, you want to equip things which actually expand your abilities rather than compensate for problems you could avoid. If you just never get hit, then there's no need for a healing ability. Of course, not getting hit is hard, but it's what you should be trying to do. I haven't really used the other ones, but I do think there's probably some synergy between some of the ones I didn't mention, as in if you use Healing Guts and the one that converts health into Unite Gauge, that sounds good, and I definitely should try that at some point. That would make your gauge just full most of the time, I presume. So there might be some good synergy in there in terms of keeping the Unite Gauge full, but for the most part I recommend avoiding crutches wherever possible. Okay. Custom blocks can be equipped and unequipped at will, so feel free to experiment to your heart's content. You'll also unlock more slots as you level up anyway, allowing you to equip roughly half the blocks at once. I think that covers most. Oh yeah, and also just don't use auto combo 1, which I forget what it's called. Full automatic or whatever. Don't use it. Unequip it, okay? Because that changes your attacks. That'll make you do cyclones at random and stuff. Don't use it. Don't use it. Right. I think that covers most of the things there are to know about the core combat. But of course, there's still plenty of nuances and things I'll forget to mention, or maybe don't even know myself. For example, I never talked about taunting. There is a taunt, which in the remastered version is unfortunately on the attack and team attack buttons, so you have to press both of those buttons at the same time. I really don't know why they made that change, and I'm still hopeful it will be changed back at some point. Taunting is not important in the slightest, so it doesn't really matter. But yeah, anyway. So I haven't talked about taunting or whatever. There's probably a couple of other things. I never mentioned throws. You can throw an enemy who's stunned by drawing a circle around them. Can be useful in some very specific circumstances, but generally not that useful. More something you would do just to mess around with your opponent. Anyway. By this point, you should at least be comfortable with the game, and you can take it from there yourself, okay? The rest of this video will be dedicated to the genre shifts and set pieces. There's timestamps in the description to individual ones, so if you'd like to skip to a certain one, you can go and do that. I'll say the operation name when I'm moving on to the next one if you want to just see one. When you hear the operation name for the next one, I'm done. Before I cover any specifics, I do want to point out that when you're doing platforming, the leader highlight circle, I think it always sits on the ground, so it should give you a good indication of where you're about to land. In other words, you don't want to be looking at your character themselves all the time if you're doing platforming. It's like any platformer, you know, where there's a drop shadow underneath you, except it just happens to be your leader highlight circle in this game, okay? So look for that rather than looking at your actual character, and you'll have a much better idea of where they are in 3D space, okay? Alright, here we go into all the individual ones. We still have a lot to cover, as you can see. Alright, so on to all the individual sections. Operation 001C, to fight against Lambo. If you mash the shoot button, the Virgin Victory will fire faster, but not only that, there are 2 shoot buttons and they both count. Mash the attack and team attack buttons to fire much faster, cutting the first phase down significantly. When it comes time to fire the grappling hook, make sure the Virgin Victory is above Orochi's tail or it won't be able to reach. This boss has a strict time requirement for pure platinum, so if you want to get the best rank, you should aim to deal as much damage as quickly as possible once you're on Orochi's back. If you damage them fast enough, you can even skip some of the quick time events, which saves a lot of time. You'll get a huge score bonus for fighting Lambo here, so aim to have a high multiplier at this part, that way you don't have to worry about your score. If you're quick on the draw, you can spend some time shooting him during the final falling phase instead of just standing around waiting for more things to throw. I think that about covers it. Operation 002A, riding the linear transport. The Kofun mini-boss during this segment can be shot at during most of this sequence. Damage you do during this section counts and makes the final phase easier. Just be careful, because if you have a morph active you can't make the transport jump or move, so remember you can use the dash button to unequip your morph whenever you like. If you have trouble dodging spikes on the track, there's a simple strategy to help you avoid them without the need for memorization. Just stick to the middle of the track as much as possible. That way when the next wall of spikes appears you'll never have to make more than one movement to avoid them. In other words, even if you have to dodge on the left by going through a gap on the left, move back into the middle lane immediately afterwards, okay? Stay in the left lane when you're fighting the Kofun, but stay in the middle lane when you're dodging spikes. Operation 002B, piloting the Kofun. Most of the time when a dual screen segment appears it's better to focus on the main view, but in this case the sub-screen is more important. Remember, audio cues are your friend, and you can guts every attack the hoedowns control. You don't have to kill them as quickly as possible. You can play more defensively and focus your attention elsewhere. Just don't let them distract you from the action and happening on the subscreen and you'll be fine. Operation 002C, the fight against Daidogu. First of all, there are whip and gun counters against this boss. Is it Daidogu? What's his name? Anyway, first of all, there are whip and gun counters against this boss. When you fight when a wonderful one's face appears in the bottom left, in this case pink or green, you activate those by equipping the morph and holding it. Do nothing else. The part against Lambo, where you have to swing the sword, is actually the exception to the rule. Generally, these counters just require you to hold the weapon. There's also a chance the boss will pick up a tanker to throw at you, which you can shoot to make explode. If you want to guts his attacks, you'll need to make sure you have at least 50 members available or the guts will break since he's so big. If you play well, his arm might fall on the tower. In that case, you can circle it with the Wonderliner to throw it back at him. The Wonderliner has another use here too, since it can heal damage to the tower by circling the little damage decals. You don't have to avoid all damage to the tower to get a pure platinum, only damage to your team. As long as the tower stays alive, you are successful, okay? There might be more to say about this, but I think that'll do. Operation 003B, defending the GDA airships. There's a part where you have to unite build a turret, and by default you'll probably make the big turret in the center, but there's an alternate one on the wing which you can use instead. The wing one is a machine gun, which means you don't have to mash the button to fire it. Good if you want to give your hands a break. If you choose to use the main cannon instead, keep in mind you can hold the attack button to charge a larger shot, which is good at disrupting the enemy's attacks. Operation 003C, the fight against Wana. When the boss fires missiles, you can block them with the hammer, which will drop them on the ground, allowing you to circle them with the Wonderliner to throw them back. When the spinning blade hits the platform, you can damage the weak points on it. A big sword seems to be one of the better ways of doing this, although I think Unite Bomb might also work for slowing it down if you have that. Anyway, if you damage them enough, you might be able to destroy them in a single cycle later, rather than having to do it twice, which saves a lot of time. The electrical attacks can be reflected with the sword for extra damage. Whenever you have any downtime, you can use the gun to get some damage in. It's difficult to land hits, but it's better than doing nothing. Operation 004A, fighting Vision. It's possible to reflect Vision's missiles by blocking them. Even when you're playing as an individual wonderful one, you have a block and a dodge, so keep that in mind. If you're looking to take her down quickly, the key is when she splits apart. The real Vision will spin the same way as she was before she doubled up. Attack that one, and she'll be stunned, taking much more damage. Alternatively, it's possible to basically skip this fight by hitting her with a Geathjerk weapon you smuggle in. If you go under the water right before a fight, there's a Chudogu there whose weapon will do the trick. Operation 004B, the fight against Blue. You should play this one cautiously and safely, defensively. Whenever you're playing as an individual wonderful one, you can still block and dodge, and those will work against Blue's attacks. When you get a single combo string off on him, Blue will recover and be ready to strike, so don't get greedy. It's a back and forth where you do a combo, then go on to defense. Operation 005B, digging with the Dakar. You don't actually have to use morphs at all to bust through most of the rocks. Pressing the team attack button will fire the Dakar's drill, which is a great way of moving quickly. If you need to buy some time against the lava, a bomb will slow it down. Apart from that, this is pretty straightforward. Remember that hand is immune to fire, and personally I recommend claws for breaking through heavier rocks. Operation 005C, Punch Out. You can punch the boss's head by tilting the left analog stick forward while you punch. Keep in mind you have a dodge and block on the usual dodge and block buttons. Every one of the boss's attacks has a tell, usually on his face. For example, if his eyebrow twitches, he'll throw a punch from that side. Alternating punches will allow you to punch faster, so do left-right rather than just mashing one. When the gauge is full, you can do a laser attack by pressing R1, I think it is. You can also do an uppercut when you collect 3 stars by pressing the usual attack button, like the regular attack button that you're normally using, which is circle or A on a Nintendo controller or whatever. Both of these attacks are very unsafe and will be punished if the boss isn't vulnerable, so make sure he's stunned first. If you want to practice this fight, then go to the epilogue on normal difficulty. The secret mission in that stage takes you right into this battle. With a little bit of practice, it becomes very enjoyable. Operation 006A, Inside the Cube. I just want to point out that you don't need to use any specific morphs inside the cube. The colours are just so you have a frame of reference about which direction you're facing on the inside. You can use a fast morph like gun or claws to move the cube quickly. When you do it right, this section shouldn't take more than 30 seconds or so. Operation 006B, the one you've all been waiting for, the shoot 'em up. There's a ton of mechanics and nuances at play in this one, so there's a lot to cover. Firstly, you can use Unite Guts to absorb bullets, and you can also dodge. If you're stationary when you dodge, you'll do a loop, which makes you invincible for a second. If you're moving side to side, you'll do a barrel roll, which allows you to pass through bullets. Secondly, the environmental hazards like pillars and the faces that make vortexes are all destructible if you use morphs against them. Some, like the hammer or fist, are better at destroying them more quickly. Thirdly, there are 2 kinds of weapons to choose from for the Virgin Victory, the spread shot or the laser. When you pick up one, you're better off sticking with it, because if you pick up the same weapon again, it'll be upgraded into a more powerful version. Basically, I recommend the spread shot, or personally I recommend the spread shot, since you'll mostly be dealing with hordes of enemies during this stage, but the point is, you're better off just sticking with whichever one you prefer. Fourthly, there are recruitable friendly ships, which I'll call options, since that's what Alice names them, a Gradius reference if you're curious. Anyway, draw a circle around an option to recruit it. Options use whatever weapon you're using too, so it's a nice boost to your damage. Options will actually behave a little differently depending on which morph you have equipped, which doesn't really matter most of the time, but it can be useful towards the end. There's a section where you have to slow a spinning room with the bomb, and if you keep the bomb equipped, it can be hard to keep your options alive there. If you swap to the sword, they'll line up behind you, making it much easier to keep them safe. Fifthly, if you kill certain waves of turtles, they'll drop a missile pickup, which will boost your firepower significantly. The missiles don't have to be aimed and can even hit things behind you. Sixthly, the hammer can block overhead attacks from the giant anvils. Just be careful, because if you swing the hammer, you'll be vulnerable until it's over your head again. Seventhly, if you've unlocked Immorta, she's my recommended pick for this stage. Unlike the Unite gun, her bow gun always points forward during this level, which is a very practical choice for a shmup. It does good damage and can destroy the destructibles in the environment. And last but not least, the camera here is obviously less than ideal, but play smarter, not harder. Don't just wait for things to appear and hit you, always be shooting them, and you'll cut down their numbers before they can even appear on screen. This whole section can be no damaged even on the highest difficulty if you know what you're doing, so hopefully that'll help you out. At the very least, you should be able to avoid dying, at least, which, yeah, should be enough to get you through this part without as much frustration as you might have had before. Whatever the case, good luck, you'll need it. Operation 007A, Inside Vorken. This one is actually a core combat sequence, but there's a very nasty trick involved. At the beginning of this stage, you'll have 10 members, and if you're not careful, you'll be stuck with 10 for quite a while, which is agonizing. Instead, you should rely on Dodge Mine, which is your best friend here. Dogus can be recruited if they're in the process of dying, and Dodge Mine deals just enough damage to leave them on that threshold every time. Drop a few mines, draw a circle around them, recruit up, and this level becomes much, much easier. Operation 007B, the fight against the Viking. I actually don't have much advice for this one, except to say you can do a roll by pressing the dodge button, but it also acts as a reflect. If you catch one of the purple projectiles with it, it'll be sent back. You can also deflect drills with the Naginata. Operation 008C, Punch Out again. The block, dodge and jump are all genuinely important in this one. It can be difficult to tell the difference between the backhand and the kick, but, and I didn't fact check this either, but I'm pretty sure you can jump out of a block. So if you're holding L2 and you jump, you can jump straight out of that block. So if you're not sure whether he's doing the backhand or the sweep, you can default to blocking and only jump once you're sure it's a kick. It's tough, but it's doable. Likewise, his blue dragon attack is also difficult. The 4 hand motions he does signal which direction the dragon will appear from. If it comes from the right or the left, you have to jump. If it comes from the top, you have to dodge. It's tricky since you have to dodge the first attack while he's still telegraphing the rest, but with a bit of practice it's totally consistent and surprisingly easy actually. If you want to practice this boss, the secret mission in the epilogue on hard will let you retry him as many times as you like. As for the other special attacks, you can just dodge those. Operation 009A, Space Harrier. You should always be moving in a circle during this part, never sit still. If you're not sure what to do, default to moving in a circle. The most common Kofun enemies will shoot where you are, so if you just keep moving you'll be fine. You can move the right analog stick during this part to aim your missiles. You should use this to prioritize killing the Tumiki pyramid things in the background, since they shoot at other locations than where you're moving, so they could hit you, you know? Take them down first and you'll be much safer. Naturally, you should save your laser for the mini bosses to get them over with as quick as possible. And that about does it. Just a few more loose ends. I'm not going to say much about unlockable moves or weapons you can get after your first playthrough. You can find a list in the menu to track your achievements and progress towards more characters. Needless to say, the more stuff you do and the more characters you find, the more you can unlock. Just keep in mind that Vorkin, Chugi and Amorta are the only ones that can wield their specific weapons. If you shoot your gun and try to form one of those morphs, you might not get it because they might have been shot as one of your bullets. Something to keep in mind. The hand unfortunately becomes more difficult to draw once you unlock the drill. To avoid getting a drill, make sure you don't curve the hand back in on itself. Leave it open a little like a mostly closed off letter C. As soon as it crosses back in on itself, it becomes a drill. Find enough wonderful ones, level them up, and you can unlock some really cool stuff, which I won't spoil. You'll just have to see for yourself. Anyway, I think I've said more than enough. It's taken a long time, but yeah, I hope you found this tutorial useful. I will probably think of something that I should have included at some point, but I think there's plenty in here to give you a very strong start on the game. More than a start, actually. You know, this covers a hell of a lot about the game. So, yeah, at this point, I just hope that you will try tackling a higher difficulty than what you did last time, and see what you can accomplish. It's a very enjoyable game to play at that max difficulty level. Personally, I think that it's just a nice game to sit down and play and just see how well you can do today, you know? I think I'm going to let my preference seep in here a bit. You know, this isn't the way you have to play the game or whatever, but I don't think you should get too hung up on on trying to pure platinum every single encounter and retrying over and over again until you get it. I don't think that was really what they had in mind. I mean, the retry system is not really very good in this game in the first place. But like, yeah, I don't know how much I should be opining in this video, which is supposed to be just a tutorial. I suppose you don't have to listen to this part if you don't want to, okay? But I don't think that the ideal way to approach the game is to go, I need to get pure platinum on every single thing, and I'm going to retry this mission over and over again until I get it. That's probably not the best way to have fun with it. I think that you should sit down and just play an entire operation from start to finish. Now, you can retry in the actual secret missions without getting punished, so you can go ahead and retry them. They're also extremely difficult, so naturally you're probably not going to get them on your first attempt. But I think the more enjoyable way to play it is sit down and just see if you can get a platinum trophy on the level, playing it all in one go, without retrying, without going back to retry all the things that you messed up, you know? It's not about just trying to get the pure platinum trophy at the end of a mission, okay? It's not about just having the game validate you in that way. It's about whatever, you know, it's about whatever way you enjoy yourself most. So the ranking system is good at pushing you to try and do better and like giving you a goal to shoot for, you know? But just don't get too hung up on it either. It's kind of, you can go two ways with it, you know? You can either take it too seriously or not seriously enough. It's pretty telling that you're not expected to get a pure platinum trophy on any stage to unlock anything. You only need platinums to unlock stuff. So I think the pure platinum trophy is there for if you're just gonna play the game over and over for years on end, like me. Then eventually you'll go, okay, I'm gonna do a pure platinum run, and I'm gonna sit down and I'm gonna try and do each mission start to finish and get pure platinums all the way through, you know. But really, just get a nice rank. Just play through an operation and get a nice rank. I've kind of said that this is like the longest arcade game in existence, and I still stand by that. But a different way that you can treat it, well, there's probably some that I don't know about that it's even longer somehow. But obviously, if you were to do like a kill screen on an old arcade game, that might take longer. But yeah, all this pedantry, you know. But my point is, there's a lot of content in this game, and you can treat it as one huge arcade game that you just go through and see if you can just make it through the game without having to retry anymore, without having to press the continue button once, you know? You could do that. If that sounds fun to you, if that sounds like an interesting way to play the Wonderful 101 and go, I'm going to do a 1 credit clear of the Wonderful 101, where if I die, it's over. Go ahead and do that, you know? There's not just one way to enjoy it. It's not just about getting pure platinum ranks. That's not it. That's not all you can do with the game. But yeah, another way to think of it is that not only is it just a big arcade game, but it's broken into little arcade game sized chunks. You know, an individual mission can take like 15 minutes. And if you just sit down and say, I'm going to play this one, it's kind of like playing a little arcade game all unto itself, you know? And you can treat it that way. You can sit down and go start to finish on a mission and not retry, and just get hit when you get hit and just see what rank you get at the end. See how well you can do. Just don't force yourself to play the game in a way that makes it unfun for you, okay? Get some enjoyment out of it. This was a pointless rant to put at the end of a tutorial video, but there you go. All right. Yeah, so thanks for watching. I hope that you have fun with the game. I hope that these tutorials help. Get in there, see what you can accomplish. Try and push yourself a little bit further than you did before. Get onto that next difficulty level and see what you can do, all right? Thanks for watching, and get out there. I know you can do it. You can do it. You can do it. All right, I'm going now. Bye-bye.